How's it going, my friends? You know, just got back from a camping trip yesterday, and it was phenomenal. I went up with my family, and we took my mom. It's her first camping trip in several years, and it gave me a time to kind of clear my head and think a little bit. It's always nice to get away, but now I'm back in town, and it's the first day back, and of course back to reality, So the first subject that came to mind today was, I wanted to do a video talking about like simulations as far as this whole idea of reality being an illusion, that we're living in some sort of a simulation or the Matrix. And then I realized how silly it was to even want to talk about that, in the sense that it was just inspired by a video I watched. It was the PBS Idea channel. They have a, what is it called? Oh, it's about this new game called No Man's Sky, in which there are several different worlds that aren't set by the creators to be finished. In other words, there's no predetermined situation. The planets, basically evolve depending on how the game is played and whatnot. And the idea is that people have been using this this idea for several years now, probably for thousands of years, or at least since man has started coming up with the idea of illusion and realized illusion. He realizes that he can delude himself, and then realizes the universe may be deluding us into living in this simulation. And it led me to think about what's worth researching. And that's what this video is really about. Not about simulation, it's about research and what is worth knowing, what is worth learning about. For me, I've had, I think it's all worth learning, because the more I think about it, I can't sit here and say, well, it's not worth it to go study and see if this universe is a simulation or a fraud. Because during that study, a person may realize, whatever conclusions they come to, they may realize that there are things to be learned, even when we're learning things that may not be true or may not go anywhere. So it's hard for a person to point the finger at another and say, hey, your research is not worth doing. Because in the long run, even the research that goes nowhere can be referred to by those of us who may not want to waste the same time on a particular subject. For example, let's say that a person has a theory about something, and so they do several several studies, whatever the research calls for, and then determines that it's not worthy and it's not true anymore. Then for years that sits on the shelf, nobody else touches it, assuming it to be false. Then another scientist gives it a shot with different expectations and has different results. And then things get very confused. It's easy to see that things aren't always what they appear, that what we think we know isn't always true. And this goes for society and for us as individuals. Each person has to remember that if society as a whole can fool itself, if society as a whole can make large mistakes that aren't corrected, then you got to imagine that the individual can too. It's kind of like with the thing video I made the other day about the Mandela Effect. And I figured I'd get the response from people who say, hey, you won't understand it until you've experienced it. And my answer is always the same to that. What we experience as individuals is not as reliable as what we experience as a whole, unless it's in subjects of the heart. And that's difficult to explain. A lot of people may totally disagree with that and say, no, your subjective experience is the most important thing to your reality. And I'd say that that's not true, because you're basing your subjective experience on many preconceived notions about what you think to be true, what others have come before you and studied. Even if you have complete New Age, beliefs about spirit, afterlife, all of this is based on previous research done by people not yourself. You can do research about things you've learned, but ultimately you've learned it from others. It hasn't been a first-hand knowledge. It's always second-hand knowledge. So once we let that go and realize that it is second-hand knowledge, then we can add to it, which means we can see where it works, where it doesn't. For me, keeping notes is a very important thing, to look back and say, okay, that my history that I think I remember isn't necessarily the history I remember. I have several, actually, journals. I've got this one that I started in 2000, and it says Y2K to question mark. It's crazy. It's been, 16 years. This one started out with several ideas about, See, at first it started out with things about camping. Then I got into eccentricity, and I started talking about, you know, things like Manly Hall quotes from certain particular, you know, ones I'd listened to, ideas about religion, philosophy, all these different things, you know. And looking back on that, I realized that even just a few years ago, I had some views that maybe weren't as well researched as I would have liked. So instead of looking back and trying to defend what I used to believe, or trying to justify it, I just say, okay, we move forward and learn new things, because every past, you know, lesson, it's all a lesson, everything. I have that one, and then I moved up and I actually bought this one a while back, which was a nicer journal because it's, you know, got gold edges and whatnot. But actually, the other day I ordered this. I saw it on eBay and I just had to have one. And it has a leather binding with actually a fold-in, you know, and yeah, it's real leather. I thought it would be fake. A fold-in part that, you know, allows it to be well sealed so you can carry it in like a backpack. The binding, it's got really nice binding, and a tree of life on the cover with some Celtic knots, some interesting symbols, and on the inside it's got this really nice custom, you know, it's nice paper. It's like, it's not cheap paper, it's really nice. It was only like $20. And that wraps up with a little leather thing. And I realize having a journal like that is crucial if you're a note taker or a thinker. Something that you have to love the item itself that you're writing in and really get the feeling, you know, the vibe. Kind of like playing a nice instrument. If you're a guitarist, you know, you don't want to play a piece of junk. You can if you have to. But I think that handwriting our thoughts down is really important, because I used to do a lot of mental notes and a lot of voice recorded notes, but they're just not the same as going back and seeing the passion behind your handwriting and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know. I can feel my stomach growling really loud, and it's telling me I'm hungry, so I'm going to have to go and get something to eat. So I'll talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful